3 years ago in summer, I interviewed a young woman displaced from what is now called South Ossetia. She was a child in 2008, and most of her memories belong to the aftermath of the war. She told me about her grandfather, an agronomist who once looked after large fruit plantations back in their village. After the war, when the ethnic cleansing had driven out the local population, their village, together with the many others, and the surrounding plantations were destroyed and turned into anonymous fields. His life's work and the ancestral home were all destroyed and erased from the landscape. In exile on a small piece of land unfit for agriculture, and already in his late age, he began a small practice. From every fruit that he and his family would eat, he saved pits. He stored, dried, and kept them with care, using his knowledge as the worker of the land. She remembered him saying that one day when the return would be possible, these seeds would help him and the community rebuild the gardens and reestablish the village where it stood. A few years ago, he passed away. He never managed to return. And the seeds that he kept were first kept by the family, but eventually they were discarded. Almost right after I heard the story, I started collecting the seeds myself, keeping them from the fruits that I would eat. And I didn't really examine the act or ask myself why I was doing that. I just wanted to connect to the man and his subtle act of resistance that had inspired me. Sharing his hopeful sentiment, I was also in my mind referring to them as tomorrow's gardens. I saw them as this kind of potential that once meant to be used to regrow, to renew. But somewhere along the way, I looked deeper at this small ritual that I was doing and what it meant. And I realized that the meaning of it for me was drifting away from the hopeful gesture that the old man had intended. And I was not interested in the future and then speculation about growth that might or might not happen, and then the images of it. Instead, their rootlessness or their sealed and self-contained bodies that reflected my own state and my own uprootedness was what drew me to them. I realized that I had not committed to owning a plant, but throughout my travels and my moves, I was carrying around these seeds, rattling them around as a sort of a base or a ground for myself. And there were these companions in this journey that I was going through. So gradually, the act of keeping them turned into a kind of a refusal. They no longer belonged to this symbolic gesture of heavy with sense of duty, but they became a natural part of my environment. I ground them, I sunk my hands into them, and I poured them from a vessel to vessel. And in the process, somewhere a familiar tone emerged from this random rattling. The sound of the landscape I was displaced from was gradually materializing, and my grandparents' house just across the road from the sea, and the sound of the waves breaking on the pebbled shore that would put me to sleep in the summer nights was coming back. And the place became real to me not as a kind of a longing or a prayer for it to return, but as something I could bring about with my own hands. What surrounded me was a space that was sounded from the memory of my body, the one that it carried for all these years. So throughout my practice, I've been dealing with themes of displacement and memory and spatial justice. And in this page explores the ritual of keeping and taking care of seeds, but not as means of summoning the future where negating or undoing the loss of the past is possible, but rather it points at seeds as carriers of different kind of potential, where through action and experience they can give rise to a world in the present. So instead of the gardens of tomorrow, the seeds allow a pebble beach to emerge, washed by tides, with their rhythm revealing and concealing, creating and erasing, in their futility and perhaps beauty, crafting presence from loss. Right before I started this residency, I had to return back home for an unexpected trip. I like doing these kind of unexpected appearances, but this time it was kind of for the wrong reason. Protests against Georgian government were escalating, and in the violent clashes with the riot police, my brother got injured. That night I knew that he was a bit in trouble and in a tough position because he had been positioned in a place where, together with other protesters, they were surrounded by the government forces. And at some point I lost contact with him, and in the morning I received a message from him that was just an X-ray. It didn't take much to recognize that his shoulder was shattered. And he told me that he would have a surgery soon. I left immediately, and like very shortly I was in Tbilisi, and I didn't go there to support him in his injury that much, but it was more to support him in his absence from the protests and kind of to step in for him while he was recovering, first at home and then at the hospital. So I found myself back in Tbilisi streets again, just as I was since 2003 revolution in Georgia. But this time it was slightly different because Tbilisi felt annoyed and tired. And after a period away, I could easily see how exhausted my friends were after months and years of resistance. The absence of certain parts of society was also quite visible, and you could tell that the actions of the regime that is trying to keep the people poor so they can easily control them and manipulate and exploit them was taking toll. Flying from Amsterdam to stand at a protest back in Tbilisi, I was asking myself, who can afford to fight for democracy? Or who do these protests represent really? Looking back at those days, and most of my life spent in protests, I recognize that we're not winning. But somehow, after years of opposition and facing corruption and every tactic to undermine the people, still to see tens of thousands spend weeks and months in the streets, I saw it as a sign that we're growing something nevertheless. In a small increment of time, from the moment where we come together up until the moment when we're dispersed by a riot police, a water cannon, or tear gas, or a rubber bullet. In these brief intervals, we establish something amongst ourselves. We enact the kind of society we strive to become. We practice and learn to care for each other and to stand by each other, to trust and rely on each other, but also to respect and listen to those who stand alongside us but are very different from us. Over the decades of resistance, we have built and we possess a civil society. And because of this, we are not losing either. The protests that restarted in December last year have been continuing daily without interruption, and many are arrested, serving unjust sentences. Many question what is achievable, and everybody is tired. The atmosphere of frustration in these protests can be read from this 20-second video where protesters are sweeping laser pointers across the police line. Those lights, to me, do a little bit more than just distract or deter. Their hectic motion, which is directly connected to the bodies of the people who shine them, to me, they try to send a message, to get a message across to the people who undermine us by blindly serving the corrupt government. During this residency, I've been collecting material and building an archive of the recordings made during the protests. To make this material audible, I will use laser light as a medium, resurrecting a technique that comes from 19th century early communications, where light was attempted to be used as a way to transmit sound. But these beams will act a bit differently than those from the demonstrations. They will stand still, but within their focused projections through subtle fluctuations in frequency, an audible signal will travel to a distant object and make it speak our voice. Converging from multiple angles to a single point, this array will carry the sound of our gatherings, not the exalted chants or explosions of anger, but rather the calm conversations, our worried debates, our arguments about what must be done about the future of us and the community, using this tool that we are so accustomed to in our protests. It will archive and preserve and voice the testimony for our resistance. So help me the laws of physics, I guess, I don't know. Thank you very much, guys. That is all. I'm really curious to hear what you would say.
Thank you, Irakli. As we do, we'll take some questions from you and have a bit of discussion about these two or maybe one projects. Does anyone want to begin, or shall I kick it off? I'm going to ask you more of a content question related to this presentation. I'm thinking about all the times that you used words like rooted, displaced, placed, and thinking about how you ended with this sustained, over decades, for some, resistance in one place. And I'm curious about this, how you're unfolding or beginning to connect, maybe via seeds, via this sense of not being in place, but finding a way to connect to those in place, and also the replacement that you did for your brother. I guess thinking about ways of being in place without physically being in place, and how you're kind of reckoning that or not, or quasi-reckoning that.
I think in the case of the seeds, to me, they create a place, and then that's how they deal with it, I guess. Because, yeah, I think just using my memory, which kind of subconsciously just translated through them into a place, that would be my method to be somewhere, not to return, but to be somewhere in the present. Allow a space to emerge or to be created. And in the case of the archive, yeah, I don't know, that's an interesting one. I didn't think of place in that chapter of this. So I don't have an answer to that.
Okay.
Thank you for this lovely presentation, Irakli. When I got in here, I heard something. I didn't think it was seeds. I think for me it sounded as waves. And then I see images of people. And I'm very curious to hear about, you said the laser, the sound of the laser, but I'm also thinking about the sound of the seeds as waves. Is that something that you also is curious about, also in relation to the archive, what's collected? And I don't know, there's something about waves and seeds. I just want to hear you talk about it.
Nice, thank you. Very nice. Yeah, indeed, these two expressions are, I understand that they're very different, and that's why they are kind of in two chapters. And the work or the part of it where I perform through the seeds, which is also kind of the first time I ever did something like this, is it has its own place, and it does something different. It does not try to do something that an archive does, because archive is still a medium to transfer knowledge, right? And here we're dealing of an attempt to create a space. So in that way, I think one is trying to preserve the space and the other one is trying to preserve the knowledge, but in very different ways. And I understand that it is a stark contrast between these, but they're also meant to be two different chapters.
Thank you, Irakli, for this presentation. I want to raise a question about the idea of futurity that you were resisting in some way when through your statement that these collection of seeds is not for the future garden. And yeah, I mean, I think also in my daily life and my daily politics, I've been witnessing that specific form of futurity that you were resisting there by refusing the framing of the seed as the future garden. I mean, which is, I think, an optimism that can be quite cruel sometimes. But I think that idea is so central in a way in our political mobilization. Like when we think of institutions, when we think of our savings, when we think of like taking another like master's course, wishing for something unclear in the indefinite future. So yeah, I mean, I'm thinking of these ways to make the question that you're raising through the collection of seed like more, let's say, palpable to our daily experience of like politics and finance. And yeah, I wonder if you have any if you relate to this reading of your work that I'm making here.
Yeah, thank you. I understand what you mean, I think exactly, but it's true that I think this refusal that I was talking about, it comes from maybe from slightly different place, and it mostly comes from me witnessing the generation of my grandparents and now my parents slowly perish, holding on to tomorrow. Like in the case of the agronomist that I was talking about earlier, and seeing this again and again and seeing the tragic outcome of it, I think that's where my mind starts to kind of revolt against it. I just feel maybe that I don't want to repeat the same fate, or maybe this dream that was carried by the old man to return, maybe there was an alternative to that, which could have been that a place could have emerged in the life could have emerged, which it did, of course. But so I also, knowing these people and being part of this community, I also understand the kind of difficulty it is to step out of that frame. But it's just an attempt. I'm not saying that I will not hope. I'm just saying that I will also try through this and to also find a place in the present. I think that's an important one for me.
There's also, for me, this maybe more than refusal, a sense of vulnerability with carrying these, I'm like imagining, carrying these around, taking these around with you from unrooted place to unrooted place. And yeah, acting with them or working with them in ways that they're not expected to be, but not also working in another kind of solution for that, but just having this kind of unanswerable, we're going to work together kind of thing. And this also makes me think about the way that you're isolating sound, which is like a kind of, could be unarticulated for some sound, but you're focusing on this, a beam, a sound, very kind of elemental things, and kind of posing whether people can find themselves in that, or gather in that, or have memory in that. And so it's not a minor gesture, but I think it's a vulnerable one, and I'm interested in how you're sitting with that.
I don't really know how to respond to this. Yeah, I think they carry very different energy to me, and in this case, it is in the case of the seeds and working with them, it is really something that emerged out of spending time with them, and it just naturally happened. And then through months of thinking about it, I just realized what had happened and kind of retrospectively figured it out. But in case of the archive, it was more like it is also kind of a retaliation. It's also kind of a way to turn this aggressive gesture back, but turn it in a way that, in a beam that carries meaning, rather than being kind of more a blunt tool to have something that is a testimony to the perhaps the biggest achievement that this resistance has to date, which is us and our community. So yeah, it's hard to talk about them like in this way together, because they did start as a single project, but then gradually kind of got divided. But now it's really hard to trace how were they so together. But yeah, that's how it goes, I guess.
Do you want to talk about the common element of sound in these and how that works for you?
Yeah, this gesture of like voicing something, it has been somehow recurring now that I think about it in several of my previous works also. So I don't know. It's something I don't try to analyze it too much. I also always kind of try to hold on to that. I don't really have a medium. I just do whatever the work tells me or the work requires. And I think this time it was really put to test because I'd never performed anything. This time I kind of had to, which yeah, I'm fine with that, I guess. But it's not really a strategy or some kind of premeditated thing. But I do recognize that this gesture kind of repeats itself. I wonder if there is kind of a fluctuation or some sort of a way in which they amplify each other, then filling like each other's gaps, or I don't know. It needs to be brought to a more complete state, maybe, to really have that insight. But yeah, thank you.
One last question, perhaps, for the seeds, for Irakli. They have a mic. Yes.
Have you ever used your own voice as sound?
You have to think about it. I'm not sure. Maybe. No, not really. Maybe not. Maybe in a distorted way. I have done things with my voice, but not in this context. No. Yeah, perhaps one day.
Can I ask one last question? Like the stuff that I see in the images when you're showing the seeds, there's like an index way. Like for me, it felt like there was a categorization, and hearing them together, there is dismantle of this categorization, who creates something else. Can you elaborate that? Why index and why not index?
Sure. Yeah, thank you. That's really, that makes sense, I think, because the image that you are probably referring to, it is really part of the process of figuring out what they mean. And there was a lot of back and forth of finding the meaning of really why am I doing this. And before I started this residency, I never really asked that, or I was just following what I thought was right. And here I took some time to really examine that, and that little step of like putting them into small piles and looking at their character and how they interact with each other, what kind of meanings they create. Is it an alphabet? Is it a language? Is it what can it do? What does it want to do? How can I allow them to express something without forcing something on them, and just have them in their natural way? And then at some point, this gesture that you saw me perform, that also kind of started from these small experiments that I tried to also demonstrate in the beginning. But it is hard because there's not really at this point a very clear structure to it. It's really an experiment, so yeah, it remains like that.
Thank you very much. Thank you for the presentation and this performance.